You.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Welcome to the class. If you can remember, we are actually discussing the valuation techniques. Yesterday, we talked about this hedonic pricing method. And in the hedonic pricing method, as we told you, mostly we try to find out the value of environmental attributes by looking at a kind of different market, related markets. For example, we talk about the housing market and the quality of environment as reflected in the prices of the housing or housing market. So that helps us in estimating the value of the environmental quality. So of course the details are available. We can go through the entire details how it is done. But mostly we know that we try to find out information, okay, a lot of information about the housing market in different localities. And there might be different characteristics, site characteristics, neighborhood characteristics, environmental characteristics, and based on that, actually, the prices will be varying. We'll try to find out that. We'll try to have a demand function and try to see so how different prices will be, or maybe how much people will be interested in paying for the kind of perceived differences in the quality of the environment, and accordingly, this prices will be reflected in the housing prices. So that way it goes. Actually, the details are given out here. I'll share with you all these details. You can have a look at that. Basically, from two sides, there will be kind of approaches. One is the consumer side, and the other one is the producer side. The consumer is the one who will be giving the demand. The producer will be the one who will be actually providing the housing. So that way, in fact, there will be a kind of optimization of the consumer in the form of maximization of utility. In the case of producer, it will be in the form of kind of producing the same level of output at minimum cost. That is basically the approach. So we can find out the demand function and find out choice point based on the utility function of the consumers, so how it goes. And we can also look at the thing from the point of view of the producer. Here, actually, we try to maximize the profit in a sense. The profit might again be function of different attributes. So we can find out the profit function. So kind of the shape of the profit function will be different. The choice point again will be the tension between this price function and the profit function. So that way it goes. And ultimately there will be equilibrium, market equilibrium, and this market equilibrium. So we have to choose between these. So there will be one point which will give you the market equilibrium. So I'll share with you. So that way, in fact, hedonic pricing method will be giving us information about the pricing of environmental goods and services. Uh, Insofar as the advantages or maybe scope of the work or scope of hedonic pricing method is concerned, we find quite a few of them. One might be that this method can be used to estimate the values of the environmental quality based on actual choices. Because here it's a kind of rifle preference approach. So we try to see the behavior of the people in actual market. Housing market is the example out here. So we try to find it out there. So that way, in fact, instead of going for a kind of contingent valuation approach where people will be expressing their statements or maybe kind of willingness. So here we are trying to observe the actual behavior of the people in the field. So of course, one thing is for sure that a lot of information will be required out there. But the good thing is that the property markets are considered to be relatively efficient in responding to the information. So in a sense, you see, so if we have the information, and in the property market, definitely information will be there, and we can see the different types of demands at different prices, and that since the prices are actually responding to the quality of the environment as well. So in a sense, we can find a good indication of value of the environmental quality. Another thing is that we talk about the information, and information in many cases are not readily available. But in the case of property markets, housing market, for example, so the records might be relatively easier to get in a sense, you see. So official statistics might be available. So of course, we know in some of the places we find that there are government values of the properties. or otherwise in other places also, kind of what will happen if any transaction has to happen. So that transaction has to go through certain official procedure. Some record will be there. So these records will help us in finding out the values of certain kind of activities. So the prices, property prices records will be relatively easier. Okay, so that's why you can rely on that. Okay, that is one big issue. In any kind of research, information is very important. And if the information is not reliable one, then it becomes extremely difficult to carry out reliable kind of research or maybe reliable study based on those information. And sadly enough, in many developing countries, we do not have a good database. So in case of even agriculture, which is considered to be one of the mainstays of the economy in India, so we do not have reliable secondary data in many cases. So that's why it becomes very difficult to carry out reliable, authentic research on agricultural issues without authentic data. Okay, so compared to that, this property records might be relatively more reliable, and so that's why studies carried out on these property records will be relatively more authentic. So as has been pointed out, the data on property sales and characteristics are readily available through many sources. So that is why this can be related to other secondary data sources. And so information on the desired variables can be easily obtained. These are some of the positives or advantages of the hedonic pricing method. But of course, there are certain issues, certain limitations of the method as well. And in fact, as you can see, since this valuation technique, which is actually suggested in case of environmental qualities, the valuation techniques will not be giving you the exact value of the environmental goods and services. Of course, this is not possible as well. So in most of the cases, we find kind of rough approximation or rough idea about the kind of probable value of environmental amenities. So that's why there might be certain issues out there in the hedonic pricing method. So let's see what these issues are. These are basically omitted variable bias, multicollinearity. These are basically with the estimation of the regression models. Okay, so choice is also another thing. So, but instead of that, let me also add a few other points apart from these things. So these are obviously there, so which are actually associated with the estimation of the function. But additionally, there will be certain other issues which we need to look into. Now, we try to link any environmental quality in the case of hedonic pricing method with the housing market. Now, if there are certain environmental goods which are not linked with the housing market, then what will happen? Will the hedonic pricing method work? But going by the method itself, we cannot say that the hedonic pricing method will work if it is not linked with the housing market. So that's a big problem. Okay. Even for those goods which are linked, the method will provide an indication of partial value. Okay, so but the fact is that you see, so many cases, certain environmental attributes will benefit a lot of people out there. Okay, so for example, when you talk about air quality improvement in a particular locality, now it might so happen that the residents will always be valuing that, and they are ready to pay high prices for the houses located in those areas where air quality is high. Similarly, for those people who might be visitors to the city where the improvement in air quality happens, so they are also benefited. But the fact is that for getting the value, we pick up only the values of the owners of the houses. In a sense, what we can say is that we are trying to find out the valuation of the area or locality or environmental attributes from all the possible sources. But of course, this is not very easy as well. But the fact is that if we could have obtained opinion about the benefits, or maybe we could have got or assessed the valuation of the environmental quality from those people as well, the things could have been relatively easier. Secondly, if in the HPM method or hedonic pricing method, it is assumed that for every attribute, house buyers are able to locate a house. Okay, so that is another important thing for every attribute, whether it is air quality or water quality, or whether it's a kind of noisy area, whether it is kind of quiet area. For every attribute, house buyers are able to locate a house for which the marginal value for each environmental attribute is equal to the marginal cost. Basically, we try to find out an optimal situation in which the marginal value of the attribute is equated with the marginal cost of getting it. So in essence, equimarginal principle we have to ensure out there, and we assume that that is possible, but always it may not happen. So, right? The third thing we talk about is about the data or the information. As we have mentioned already, information plays a very important role in any kind of market. And in the case of a perfectly competitive market structure, we always insist on perfectly available information for buyers and sellers. Okay, so here we assume that both the buyers and the sellers are well informed about how environmental attributes vary spatially across the area being studied. Of course, this assumption is not always realistic, because many a time there will be a lot of information gap. People may not be having enough information about different attributes of housing market. Although it is easier to find out information compared to many other markets, it's relatively easier to get information in the housing market. But even then, there are a lot of asymmetries. There are a lot of constraints in obtaining or getting or availability of the information out there, right? So that's why this assumption we cannot say that it's always realistic. Lastly, we can also talk about the investment on housing. You see, the nature of the investment on housing is important out here. For housing investment, so it's a long-term investment. Many a time people have to save for quite long period of time to get a good quality or maybe a good house in a good environment, right? So obviously, in these cases, when you talk about investment, long-term investment, expectation plays a major role. Okay, how good it will be in the future, how will the environmental quality remain over a period of time, those things are important. So it's not that we are talking about only current level of environmental quality, but also the future changes in the environmental quality. Yes, it might so happen that a particular locality might be quite quiet as of now, but if the government proposes certain plan, kind of urbanization plan, or maybe new schemes or projects which might seriously impact the quality of environment in that particular locality, then obviously in the future the environmental quality will not remain the same. So in that case, the future environmental quality will deteriorate, and accordingly the prices of the housing market in the future, that expectation will also be quite different than as of now. So this that the expectation has a role to play over there. Okay, the expectation regarding the changes in the level of environmental quality will affect the price of the house. If there is a possibility of environmental quality being degraded because of certain intervention by the government or because of other development, then obviously the prices of the housing market in that particular locality will get affected. Now that expectation is not captured by the hedonic pricing method. But in spite of these issues or limitations of the hedonic pricing method, would like to reiterate the fact that this hedonic pricing method is one way of getting the direct response of the people regarding quality of environment in certain, or you can say environment information, or maybe kind of value, or maybe information on the benefits of environmental attributes. So that direct response goes a long way in estimating the value of environmental quality, right? So that way, HPM has its usefulness in assessing value of environmental quality in case of so many such situations or many such services. We can talk about many ecosystem services as well. So where this type of HPM technique might be used. Okay, so that's possible. The next thing to talk about here is about the travel cost method, which is another very important method out here. So which is considered to be one of the oldest approaches to environmental evaluation. Okay, in fact, this was started by Harold Hoteling in 1930, but of course, practically it was in a letter actually, which was written to the U.S. Forest Service in the 1930s. But later on, it was used by people like Wood and Price in 1958. Of course, it was more popularized by another two people, Clausen and Nates in 1966. So here, the method, the travel cost method that we are talking about, the name itself tells us about the type of activities or the process involved in the method. It's travel cost method. Basically, it's the cost which is incurred in the process of traveling from one place to another. The people or the visitors have to pay or maybe incur the cost. So that actually reflects the indirect value of a particular location or locality, recreational site. So this method can be used to estimate economic benefits or cost resulting from changes in excess cost for a recreational site. We can talk about many recreational sites. It might be kind of a dam, it might be kind of a hill, it might be kind of forest or water, whatever that may be. So if there is a change in the excess cost for those recreational sites, so this can be estimated from with the help of the travel cost method. Elimination of an existing recreational site. So probably the demand might go down if it so happens that the importance of the recreational site has reduced. And in a sense, we can say that elimination of an existing recreational site that can means in fact resulting from that the cost or benefit. Okay, so that can be estimated. Addition of new recreational site, okay, from that if there is any kind of benefit or cost that can be estimated. And also changes in environmental quality at a recreational site. So the benefits or costs associated with these activities might also be captured by the travel cost method. Okay. Now, the basic premise of the travel cost method is that the time and travel cost expenses that people incur to visit a site represent the price of access to the site. So that way, in fact, people's willingness to pay to visit the site can be estimated based on the number of trips that the people may make at different travel costs. So if we take into account this travel cost of different people visiting a particular location or maybe particular recreational site, so in essence, we can say that if people are spending money, if people are incurring cost for in the name of traveling from one place to another, or maybe traveling a particular place, then obviously we can say that that might be analogous to estimation of people's willingness to pay for a marketed good, because it's a kind of recreational site, so people spend money. It's a kind of market value is there. It's not a kind of non-market value kind of a thing. So that will be based on the quantity demanded at different prices. Okay, so that way, in fact, we assume that the travel cost method will work. So the hypothesis are something like this: the cost that the people will be spending are at least equal to the minimum value of the benefit that the people will be getting when visiting the sites and their environmental goods or services. So otherwise, they will not be spending this much. So that's why at least that will be equal to the minimum value of the benefit that people will be getting. So this travel cost that way can be used as a proxy for the price of visiting outdoor recreational sites. Okay, outdoor recreational sites, there might be quite a few, as we mentioned, national park, water bodies, wetlands, okay, whatever that may be. In other words, the recreational benefits at a specific site can be derived from the demand function that relate observed users' behavior to the cost of visit. Because at different costs, different people will be making different visits. Number of visits is one actually concept which is used actually. So that will lead to the concept of visitation rate. So we'll come to that. So how many people will be visiting? How many people out of the total population might be visiting from a particular zone or locality? So that might define what visitation rate is all about, right? So what are the steps being taken out or maybe been taken up for analyzing this travel cost method or maybe carrying out this travel cost method? Basically, it tries to estimate the cost of travel and visit for its regions of origin. From different regions, people might be visiting. So they will try to, this method will try to estimate the cost of travel from or its region of origin. So for that, okay, so questionnaires might be framed, which might be having information or collecting information on visitor's trip, expenses, characteristics, and all those things. Of course, let me tell you that there are ways of carrying out this travel cost method. Basically, there are two distinctions. One is the zonal travel cost method, in which case we rely on the secondary data. But additionally, there is another travel cost method, which is known as the individual travel cost method. In the case of individual travel cost method, individual visitors are interviewed using schedule or maybe questionnaires. In which case, people will be asked or visitors will be asked questions on many different aspects. Okay, so individual interviewing has to be carried out here. But in the case of zonal travel cost method, so this rigorous personal surveys will not be carried out. Instead of that, secondary data will be collected on various dimensions, various kind of parameters, and based on that, demand function will be estimated, and demand function will be used to find out overall economic values or benefits for those places coming from the different users out there. So while estimating the travel cost, normally we take into account the cost which is undertaken in different visible variables or parameters. For example, how much they have spent in the name of visiting from the place to the place of destination in the form of maybe airfare, rail fare, or maybe route tax or road fare. So those things will be taken into account. The cost of accommodation will be taken into account. The entry fees will also be taken into account. So all those things and the food and other logistical support, so the expenses involved in this process will also be taken into account. Now the fact is, you see, so all these things are visible, but of course, people are also talking about the time which will be spent in the name of traveling and kind of visiting that particular place. So obviously, time has alternative uses. Time has its opportunity cost. So the same time which has been used to visit the place might have been used to generate some other kind of income. So in that case, people talk about actually having some kind of estimation for the cost of travel or cost of time as well. So that is also normally tried to be estimated based on the time which is taken for undergoing the travel or maybe carrying out the travel. So that is another thing which I wanted to tell you. So based on all these things, the demand for the site will be estimated depending on the cost of travel and visit and other characteristics. So here, so when you talk about cost of travel, we're also trying to take into account the time cost involved in the entire process. So as I pointed out, there are two different types of travel cost approach. One is the simple zonal travel cost approach, which will be using mostly the secondary data. Some simple data collected from visitors. Sometimes it is okay. So this is also taken into account, but mostly it is the secondary data which will be used. The zonal travel cost method is applied by collecting information on the number of visits to the site from different distances. So mostly it is from the secondary sources, but in some cases, maybe some data from visitors might also be collected. But in the case of, as against these, in the case of individual travel cost method, okay, a more detailed survey of visitors is being carried out. So this individual travel cost method is similar to the zonal approach, but of course it will be using survey data. It's not the secondary data, it's the primary data for the investigator. So it uses survey data from individual visitors in the statistical analysis rather than data from each of them. So therefore, in the case of individual travel cost method, more amount of data will be required. And so that's why it might be a little bit complicated procedure for analysis. But at the same time, so if you have more in-depth data, more detailed information, so that will also help you giving relatively more precise final result. Okay, that is also an advantage out of this. Another thing is actually hedonic travel cost method, in which will attempt to place values on the characteristics of recreational resources. Okay, so values on the characteristics of recreational resources. If we talk about a particular national park, okay, so what are the values that will be put on different attributes or characteristics of the national park, whether it is the flora, whether it is the fauna, whether it is something else which will attract, which will actually fetch different values. Those information will be actually collected, and these will be used to estimate the demand function for the overall area or maybe location that we talk about. Another thing is the random utility approach, where survey and other data will be used, and statistical techniques are relatively more kind of more complicated or complex. So this method will not be discussing in detail. We'll try to concentrate on the more general individual travel cost and the zonal travel cost method. As has been pointed out, the travel cost method is applied by collecting information on the number of visits to the site from different distances. Travel and time costs will increase with distance. So this information allows the researcher to calculate the number of visits purchased at different prices. In a sense, this will be, because you see, we know that prices and quantities, so that actually will give us the demand function. Okay, so how much of quantity is purchased at different prices? So normally, the demand function will be having a kind of negative relationship with the price of the commodity. So that helps us in estimating the demand function. Okay, and once we can estimate the demand function, from there we can estimate the consumer surplus, and consumer surplus are nothing but the economic benefits. Okay, so for the recreational services of the site, we can find out the demand function, and this demand function will help us in kind of summarizing the consumer surplus, which can be nothing but the economic benefits for the consumers from the sites. Okay, what are the stages or what are the steps that are to be taken into account while talking about carrying out travel cost method? The first step is to define a set of zones surrounding the sites. So this might be defined by concentric circles around the site or by geographic divisions that make sense. Sometimes we talk about metropolitan areas. In the case of Western countries, we can talk about counties, which might surround the site at different distances. Maybe, for example, if we are talking about a place like Kamakya, so we might talk about different zones, like maybe Bengal might be one zone, Bihar might be another zone, Delhi might be another zone, something like that. And so this might be based on the distances from the site that we are considering for travel cost method. So once we have idea on the zones, we'll try to collect information on the number of visitors from each zone and the number of visits made in the last year. Okay? Number of visitors from each zone and the number of visits made in a reference period, and that reference period is normally the previous year. Okay. So once that is done, once the information is collected, of course, information has to be collected on various attributes or various parameters. Okay, so while talking about cost, definitely the cost in the form of travel, cost in the form of accommodation, cost in the form of entry fee, all those information has to be collected, and this will be for different zones. Of course, so mostly in case of general travel cost method, we are talking about the data which are already available. The third step is to calculate the visitation rates per 1,000 population in each zone. So basically, this is nothing but the total visits per year from the zone divided by the total population in thousands. Okay, so total visits per year from the zone. How many people might have visited from that zone divided by the total population of that zone in thousands. So that is the visitation rate, and visitation rate actually tells us about okay, the demand of a particular location from a particular locality. So after that, the average round trip travel distance and travel time to the site for each zone will be calculated using concept like average cost per kilometer and per hour of travel time. Now here actually we need to take into account the opportunity cost of time as well. So certain things are very much obvious. So how much average round trip travel distance they have traveled, or maybe travel time they have made use of, and okay, so we try to find out the average cost per kilometer and average cost per hour of travel time. Those things can be estimated out of that, and at the same time, as we have pointed out, travel time is important. So the opportunity cost of travel time is also estimated. So that is opportunity cost, as you can understand, is the next best alternative which is foregone. So for performing this task, if somebody decides to visit a particular location, then he has to spend time for a few days. Now, for these few days could have been used or utilized for okay, some other works which might be productive for him or her. So this value for these 3 days, 4 days will represent the opportunity cost of time for that person who has undertaken the travel. After that, with the help of regression analysis, so in that regression analysis, actually this cause and effect relationship will be estimated. So using regression analysis, so the relationship between visits per capita to travel cost and other important variables will be estimated. Okay, so per head, what is the cost of visit, and there will be other variables as well. So those things will be taken into account. So based on that, because the visitation rate will be there, so that shows a kind of demand for the site. Okay, so that will help us in estimating the demand function for an average visitor per head or per unit. What will be the quantity demanded at different prices that can be estimated from that. So the analysis here might include a lot of other information like demographic variables like age, income, gender, and education level using the average value for each of the zones. You might be having different zones. From different zones, what is the demand? So those things can be estimated. But at the same time, there might be effort to include certain socioeconomic variables or maybe demographic variables in the form of age. It might so happen to understand whether the demand for the site is more for young age population or maybe relatively elderly population, or whether high income people prefer to visit those places, or whether it is low income people who are actually more interested in visiting those places, whether males are more interested or over females, whether more educated, highly educated people take up this type of travels or vice versa. Those things can be actually estimated with the help of these regression models. So constructing the demand function for visits to the site using the results of the regression analysis that is done. On the demand curve, the total visitors to the site at current excess cost. So that is actually taken into account, and also the information has been obtained in the previous regression model. So this information might also be used, and ultimately a demand function for visits to the site can be estimated. So once we have the demand function, so with the help of the concept of consumer surplus, the total economic benefit of the site to visitors can be estimated, because that is basically the value of the consumer surplus, and the value of the consumer surplus is nothing but the area under the demand curve. So that is the final stage in essence in case of travel cost method. So some models are given here. A simple travel cost model. You can look into the slide. For example, let us assume that the price is the only sacrifice made by the consumer. So in that case, the demand function for a good with no substitute will be given as X, which is a function of price. So X is the quantity or maybe amount. So price is the price for that kind of price of that service or kind of commodity, something like that. So other things, for example, income preferences, all these things are considered to be constant. But of course, consumer often incurs other costs. It's not that only price for visiting. Okay, so other costs might be there. For example, we talk about travel expenses and loss of time. Travel expense obviously will be part of the price. The loss of time is not normally considered to be part of time. So if you take those things into account, the demand function will be something like this. Function X is a function of price and other cost. Okay. So obviously, we try to find out maximum satisfaction or maximum utility of individuals as a consumer. Okay. So it will be something like this. Maximization of utility. For example, we consider two goods or services, X1 and X2. The prices at which this can be obtained are something like P1 and P2. Excess cost, additionally, we are talking about, apart from these prices, some other costs are there. So this might be for C1, C2. Income obviously has to be taken into account. So if these are there, then utility maximizing choice of the consumer will be given as maximization of utility, where utility is a function of two commodities. But at the same time, there are certain constraints. It's a constraint optimization problem. So in this constraint optimization problem, we have this P1 plus C1 multiplied by X. Basically, it means that the amount of income of the consumers, or maybe overall, in fact, that income of the consumer cannot be exceeded by the expenditure incurred on these, in the travel and expenses on different attributes out there. So here, X1 is denoting the aggregate of price goods and services, and X2 the number of annual visits to a recreational site. And for sake of simplicity, it is assumed that the cost of access to the market good is negligible. So market good is suppose X1. So in that case, C1 is considered to be 0, and that the recreational site is free. So that means there will not be any price for recreational site. In that case, P2 will be equivalent to 0, because this X1 is marketed good, X2 is non-marketed good in a sense. So in that case, you see, in essence, number of annual visits to a recreational site is not a kind of marketed good. So you can say service. So that is given by X2. So in that case, you can reformulate the equation. The equation will be something like this: maximization of utility, which is subjected to the condition that P1 X1 plus C2 X2 is equal to R. In the previous case, what we assume that if C1 is equivalent to 0, that means the cost of access to the market good is 0, and the recreational cost is recreational site is made available at free of cost. So in that case, P2 is equal to 0. So P1 X1 plus C2 X2. So that will be the total cost, and this total cost should not exceed the amount of budget that the individual is having. So under these conditions, the utility maximizing behavior of the consumer depends on his preferences. Basically, it's the utility or utility function will tell us what his preferences are all about, his budget, how much income he has, and the prices of the private goods and services, because P1 is the prices of the private goods and services. And lastly, the excess cost to the recreational side, which is given as C2. So these variables will actually influence the utility maximizing behavior of the consumer. Total cost, travel cost method is based on the assumption that changes in the cost of access to the recreational site have the same effect as a change in price. The number of visits to a site decreases as the cost per visit increases. So in essence, it is related to the demand function, or you can say that. So this will help us in estimating the demand function. So demand function for visits to the recreational site will be given as x2 is equal to x2 is a function of C2, and it can be estimated using the number of annual visits as long as it is possible to observe different cost per visit and up to the cost at which visit become equal to 0. Okay, so depending upon the cost of undertaking the travel, so number of visits might be possible, and this number of visits will signify the demand for the services. Okay, so and this demand function will help us in estimating the economic value. So this is the model. This model can be extended to include the effect of other substitute sites as well, or otherwise, okay, same model can be used to estimate visit per time and individual to site. Probably there is a mistake out here, so it's not very clear. Let me verify that one. The last sentence is not very clearly written. The model can be used to estimate visits per time for an individual. Oh, no, this is not very clear. Now, this is the kind of relationship that we can think of between the number of visits, because we are talking about the expected relationship between the number of visits and cost per visit. So here on the y-axis we have the cost, and the x-axis we have the number of visits. So at higher prices or higher cost, the number of visits might be lower, but whereas at higher number of visits, the price or cost of visit is considered to be relatively much lesser. So another thing is the hedonic travel cost method. So that I'll not discuss in detail. That's not required as well. So these are available out there, of course. We'll try to have you can have a look into this. It's not that you have to go through all those things in detail. But there are certain issues in general in case of the travel cost method. In essence, in the case of travel cost method, it's again a kind of refill preference method, as we tell, as we can visualize. So this method can be used for the visits of the people visiting from a particular locality to a particular site. So in that sense, okay, the people will be spending money in different activities, and these monetary values of this, or in a sense, the expenses. So that will represent to some extent their actually willingness to pay for different qualities of environmental resources or goods. That is fine. But at the same time, there are certain issues which are to be looked into. In a sense, you can say that these are some of the limitations of the travel cost method. One of the limitations of the travel cost method is that this method assumes that the people perceive and respond to changes in the travel cost the same way that they would respond to changes in admission price. Travel cost is one component of the total cost. And also another thing is that admission price. Admission payment is basically maybe entry fee of a national park or entry fee to a particular site, something like that. So here it is believed or assumed that the response to the changes in the travel cost and response to changes in the admission price might be similar for the visitors. It may not be so. That is the case. If there is an abrupt change in the travel cost, then probably okay, people's response to that change may not be similar to an increase in the admission fee or maybe entry fee to the site. Might have a little bit of differential impact on the decision of the people to visit a particular place. So that is what is not assumed to be true in the case of the travel cost method. They consider these two things to be almost in a similar manner. So another issue is defining and measuring the opportunity cost of time or the value of time spent on traveling. So that the way it is being carried out, that can be problematic at sometimes. Some of the people point it out like that. Okay. Normally, as we have mentioned, the time spent on traveling uh, has an opportunity cost. So this should be added to the travel cost, or the value of the site will be. Otherwise, the value of the site will be underestimated. But there is no strong consensus on the appropriate measure. So what is to be carried out? What is to be considered while talking about this opportunity cost of travel time? So whether it should be the wage rate of the person or some fraction of the wage rate, and the value chosen can have a large effect on benefit estimates. Because so it depends. So if we are talking about the wage rate or a fraction of the wage rate, depending upon that, the valuation means in fact the value placed on the benefits, or maybe the values overall benefits. So that will be impacted a lot. So that is another thing which has certain issues which is not yet resolved. That is one problem. In some cases, yes, some people like to travel. In that case, this travel that we are talking about, opportunity cost of travel, the travel time itself might be a benefit, not a cost. In that case, the value of the site will be overestimated. Okay, so that is another issue out there. Some people like to travel, so the time which will be spent, that will also give some values or maybe benefits to the people. So in that case, whether we should consider this travel time to be a cost or a benefit. So depending upon that, the overall value or the benefit of the environmental site or location will be either underestimated or overestimated based on that. It is also assumed that individuals take a trip for a single purpose, to visit a specific recreational site. Okay. So this is another thing, but normally that may not be the case. You see, there might be multiple purpose trips. One might go for kind of medical tourism also. One might go for some educational trip also. At the same time, they might be visiting a particular natural site. So multi-purpose trips might be there. If there are multi-purpose trips, isolating the travel cost and estimating it separately might be very difficult. For example, it might so happen that you might have gone to an educational institution for some other work. At the same time, you also visited some other places. So in that case, how will you divide the travel cost which is spent on both these cases? Of course, your primary objective was to visit an educational institute. So whether in that case, so whether the travel cost that you have incurred for traveling that place should be considered only for educational purpose or for recreational purpose also, or if you divide it in between educational purpose and recreational purpose, what percentage of it will be for recreational purpose and what percentage of it will be for educational purpose? So that is another question. So for multi-purpose trip, it becomes a little bit difficult to actually segregate these two components. Okay. Another thing is that in the case of individual travel cost method, we try to interview the visitors. But in those cases, it's a kind of convenience sampling kind of a thing. So we do not try to go for kind of following, we do not try to go for proper sampling design. So there might be bias insofar as interviewing visitors. That is not uncommon for kind of interviews or maybe surveys. So that is there everywhere. It's not that it's specific to only the travel cost method. It's not. It is relevant for many such survey works. So that's why it's a kind of general problem which might arise in the case of collecting data from the individual visitors from the site. So biases might be there. So another few, a few other issues related with the travel cost method are something like this: the measuring recreational quality and relating recreational quality to environmental quality can be difficult. We mostly try to do that in the case of travel cost method here. The quality of the site and which is considered to be the quality of the environment. whether these two things are the same or not. That is the question. If we visit a particular national park, the quality of that, the entire thing, is it environmental quality or a part of that is not environmental quality? So normally we try to consider both to be the same. Standard travel cost approaches provide information about current conditions, but not about gains or losses from anticipated changes in resource conditions. This is, of course, a little tricky. Uh, so there might be anticipated change in the resource conditions. There might be some degradation of the resource. So in that case, there might be some losses. People might not be very much willing to visit those places. So that way, there might be certain kind of losses out there. So that is the anticipated gains, anticipated conditions, or anticipated losses, right? Anticipated changes in the resource conditions, which might lead to kind of gains or losses for the people in the future. So, but those things are not available. Those information will not be available. So in order to estimate the demand function, there needs to be enough difference between distances traveled to affect travel cost, and for differences in travel cost to affect the number of trips. Because the number of trips or the visitation rate is considered to be one of the indicators of the demand for a particular site by people from a particular location. So that's why what is assumed here is that, so if we have to have a demand function, enough difference between distances traveled to affect travel cost should be there. Otherwise, if the distance is not sufficiently large, then the travel cost will not be sufficiently different. So in that case, the demand function probably cannot be properly drawn or estimated. And if the demand function cannot be properly estimated, then probably the benefits or values which will be kind of derived out of this may not be very meaningful or very kind of substantial or useful for making a conclusion out of this. So that is why it is said that it's not well suited for sites near major population centers, where many visitations may be from origin zones that are quite close to one another. So the distance might play a very important role, and this may not be the case in the case of kind of visits from major population centers. Okay, so they might be quite close to each other. Differences in the distance will be very less, and that will not have a very much impact or maybe visible impact on the demand function constructed for this travel cost method. So these are some of the issues, or in a sense, you can consider to be limitations of the travel cost method as well. But in hindsight, what we can say is that this refill preference approaches in the form of hedonic pricing method or travel cost method are the ones which will give us some kind of observed behavior, or maybe observed, so which can be observed from the behavior or maybe approaches or responses of the people in actual scenario. So which is not the case in the case of contingent valuation method. Contingent valuation method is mostly stated one, which might vary and which might not be quite close to the values which should be there. But in the case of these two methods, hedonic pricing method and the travel cost method, but of course, people's responses can be taken quite seriously to estimate the demand functions and accordingly to estimate the values associated with the environmental attributes. But of course, let me also tell you that in some of the cases, you see what happens, there might be market values as well as non-market values. Okay, for example, we are talking about a wetland. The wetland might be having some market values. Market values in the form of maybe recreational measures might be available out there. Boating might be there, right? So maybe fishing might also be allowed out there. And this fishing fish catch, or fish which might be collected and sold in the market will be having some certain market value. So in those cases, of course, at the same time, wetlands will also be very important for maintaining the kind of atmospheric cycle or maintaining the water cycle of the local surroundings. So in those cases, the wetlands will be having both the market value and the non-market value. So in those cases, probably one method of valuation may not be sufficient. Maybe there might be a combination of both non-market valuation techniques or this type of tactics which can be actually directly used for certain activities. So they may have to be combined. For example, the travel cost method might be combined with kind of a contingent valuation method like willingness to pay. So, and then by combining both these things, probably, so we can arrive at the value of a particular wetland or maybe particular natural resources side. So that is also possible, and there are a lot of literature which have been carried out by undertaking or by combining these type of different methods which capture both non-use value as well as the use values. Depending upon the situation, this type of things are done. So, okay, let me stop here today. If you have any question, you can please raise.